poor girl helps a millionaire fix his car. Then he sees the ring on her finger and freezes. She thought he was just a stranger with a broken-down car, but one glance at the ring on her finger changed everything. What started as a simple act of kindness unraveled into a dark family secret buried for decades. Sophie Bennett, an ordinary girl with an extraordinary past, unknowingly holds the key to the downfall of one of New York's most powerful empires. As billionaire heir Ethan Carter digs deeper, shocking truths emerge about his father, about Sophie, and about a promise made long ago. What happens when the truth is more dangerous than the lies? Stay tuned. This story will leave you speechless before we begin the story. Leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. The late afternoon sun cast a golden hue over the quiet stretch of rural highway as dust curled behind the footsteps of a young girl. Sophie Bennett, just 9 years old, walked the edge of the road with her worn backpack bouncing against her shoulder blades. Despite her age, there was something unshakably steady in her gaze, a quiet resilience that made her seem older than she was. In her bag, nestled between school books and a tattered lunchbox, was a small grease-stained bundle, her toolkit, a gift from her late mother's brother, Uncle David. As she rounded a bend near the old sycamore tree, Sophie's pace slowed. Up ahead, a sleek black Mustang sat idle hood, up a wisp of smoke curling from beneath. Standing beside it, dressed in a suit that clearly didn't belong to the countryside, was a man pacing with frustration, his phone pressed to his ear. "I don't care how busy the city is," he snapped. "I'm not waiting 3 hours for a tow. Just fix it." He ended the call abruptly and threw his hands up in exasperation, glaring at the car as if anger might make it run again. Sophie stood for a moment, watching something about the man's helplessness against the machine sparked a tug of recognition. She stepped forward. "Excuse me, sir," she called gently. The man turned, startled. "I'm fine. Everything's under control. You look stuck." He sighed clearly. "Not in the mood. You should get home before dark." "I will," she said, unfazed. "But I know a thing or two about engines. Maybe I can help." The man gave a faint, humorless chuckle. "I doubt a child can fix what a certified mechanic can't." Sophie just smiled. "Sometimes you don't need a certification, just the right eyes." Before he could protest, she stepped closer and peered under the hood. Her hands stayed by her sides, respectful but curious. "When did it start acting up?" "About 20 minutes ago. Started overheating, then died." "Sweet smell." He blinked. "Yeah, like maple syrup." "How did you—" "Coolant leak," Sophie said, matter-of-factly, crouching to point at a small puddle under the radiator. Right there. The man, now intrigued, crouched beside her. "I'm Ethan Carter, Sophie Bennett," she replied, standing again. "Nice to meet you." He stared at her for a moment longer, a flicker of something unreadable in his expression. As she pulled her makeshift repair kit from her backpack, his eyes fell to her hand. A delicate, oversized ruby ring adorned her finger, held in place by a loop of thread wrapped tightly around the band. "Your ring," he said suddenly. "Where did you get that?" Sophie looked down. "It was my mom's. She said it was important. Said one day I'd understand why." Ethan's face paled. He stared at the ring as if seeing a ghost. Slowly, he knelt beside her, his voice low and unsure. I've seen that ring before. A long time ago, I gave one just like it to a little girl at Grace Haven Orphanage. Sophie froze. Grace Haven, she echoed. My mom used to say that name in her sleep. She said it was a place where promises were made and broken. The two stood in stunned silence as the last light of day faded. Ethan looked at the girl in front of him, the child with intelligent eyes, a mechanic's skill set, and a ruby ring too heavy for her small hand, and felt the floor of his life begin to shift. "Let me give you a ride home," he said softly. Sophie hesitated, then nodded. "Okay." As they climbed into the car, neither could know the storm they had just stepped into. The past was no longer buried. The truth, long hidden, had found a way back through the innocence of a child and the memory of a man who thought he had forgotten everything. This wasn't just a coincidence. It was the beginning of something far greater, something that would test everything they believed about family loyalty and who they really were. This was just the beginning of a story that would uncover secrets buried for decades, test the strength of love over blood, and challenge the very legacy of one of New York's most powerful families. Don't forget to subscribe and follow the next chapters in this unforgettable story. What comes next will shock and inspire you. Ethan Carter hadn't planned to take detours that day, least of all into his own past. But as his car rolled down the quiet country lane toward the modest row of apartments where Sophie lived, every turn of the tires felt like fate pressing its hand on his shoulder. He stole glances at the little girl in the passenger seat, watching how her small fingers fidgeted with the ruby ring. There was something hauntingly familiar in the way she twisted it, a subconscious habit he had once seen in someone else. When they arrived, Sophie unbuckled herself with practiced ease and pointed to a narrow stairwell. "We live on the second floor. Come meet my uncle." Ethan hesitated, still caught in the haze of what he'd just seen. But curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, pushed him to nod. Sure. The door swung open before they could knock. A broad-shouldered man in his 40s stood there, worry etched into the lines on his face. "Sophie, where the hell have you been?" "I've been." His voice stopped cold when he noticed Ethan. "It's okay, Uncle David." Sophie interjected quickly. "This is Mr. Carter. His car broke down, and I helped him fix it." David Bennett gave Ethan a long, guarded look. The kind of look life teaches you when you've been let down more than once. Ethan extended his hand anyway. "Ethan Carter, I owe your niece a thank you, and maybe a full-time job in about 10 years. David shook his hand, still wary. "She's good with machines. Picks up everything I show her. Come in." The apartment was modest, with second-hand furniture and wallpaper, curling at the seams, but it was clean and warm. Photos of Sophie with a smiling woman filled the space. School, events, holidays, snapshots of everyday joy. The woman in the pictures had Sophie's wide-set eyes and the same gentle smile. Her mom, David, explained, nodding toward the frames. "My sister, Grace. She passed last spring cancer." "I'm sorry," Ethan said quietly. David shrugged. "We get by Sophie's strong." Ethan nodded, then turned to the girl who was now rifling through her backpack for something. "Sophie, that ring. You said it belonged to your mom." She held it up between her thumb and finger, the ruby catching the light. "Yeah. She said someone gave it to her to keep safe. Said it mattered." "Did she ever mention Grace Haven Orphanage?" he asked gently. David stiffened. "Why?" Ethan looked between them, choosing his words carefully. "Because a long time ago, I gave a ring, just like that, to a girl named Lily. at Grace Haven. She was maybe 3, maybe 4. I was only a teenager myself, but I promised I'd come back for her. David's expression shifted from suspicion to disbelief. You're saying that ring belongs to that girl? I don't know, Ethan admitted, but I recognized it the second I saw it, the filigree work, the way the stone is set. There were only 2 of them. My mother had them made, one for each of her twin daughters. The room went still. Twins, David echoed. Ethan nodded. My mother, Eleanor Carter, was a nurse. She worked briefly at Grace Haven. That's how I met Lily. She wasn't my sister, not biologically, but I loved her like family. David sat down slowly. Grace never said anything. She just told us she adopted Sophie when she was 2. She never talked about the orphanage. Sophie had gone quiet, hugging her knees to her chest on the couch. Her eyes were wide, confused. Am I her? Ethan sat across from her. I don't know. But I'd like to find out. David rubbed a hand over his face. Why now? Why are you here? I wasn't meant to be, Ethan said honestly. But my car broke down right in front of her, and she knew exactly how to fix it. Then I saw the ring, and I had to ask. He pulled a business card from his wallet and placed it gently on the coffee table. I'm not here to disrupt anything, I just need to know. If there's a chance Sophie is Lily, then there's a bigger story here. One that someone worked very hard to bury. David looked at the card, then at Sophie. She's all I've got. I'm not trying to take her. Ethan said, I swear. But if we're both holding pieces of a broken story, we owe it to her to find the whole truth. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sophie's voice, small but clear, cut through the silence. If my mom kept a secret, it's because someone was chasing it. Ethan looked at her in awe. She used to say, Sophie continued, some truths are safer hidden, but one day you'll be strong enough to find them. And suddenly, Ethan knew he wasn't just here to revisit a memory. He was standing at the edge of something life-altering, one that would connect past and present in a way none of them were ready for. But Sophie was right. The truth had been hidden long enough, and soon it would no longer stay buried. The next morning, Ethan Carter found himself parked outside the county records office, staring through the windshield like a man about to unearth a ghost. The folder in his lap contained only fragments, an old photo of the orphanage before its closure, a photocopy of his mother Eleanor's nurse identification badge, and a scan of the ruby ring's original design sketch that had once been tucked away in her belongings. Pieces, he thought, just pieces. But if there was one thing the last 24 hours had taught him, it was that some puzzles screamed to be solved. Inside the building, the fluorescent lights flickered, as if wary of the secrets they were about to illuminate. Ethan approached the desk, where a clerk, barely glancing up, handed him a request form. Adoption records are sealed by default, she said. Unless you're the legal guardian or the adoptee, I'm the biological relative. Ethan replied carefully, I believe a child connected to me may have been adopted under a different name. The mother was Grace Bennett, formerly Grace Sullivan. At the mention of the name, the clerk's eyes flickered with something recognition, maybe even sympathy. She tapped a few keys, then leaned in, lowering her voice. Off the record, Grace's name did appear once in our archives in connection with a case flagged confidentially. It was sealed quickly. Unusually fast. The kind of fast that suggests someone with power pushed it. Ethan leaned forward. Who? The clerk shook her head. I didn't say anything, but if you're serious, try the archives under property acquisition. The orphanage was sold to a shell corporation before it closed. You might find breadcrumbs there. With a quiet thank you, Ethan moved to the next window, requesting zoning and land transfer documents. He combed through brittle folders and digital archives for hours, tracing a pattern that chilled him. Grace Haven Orphanage had been bought out by a holding company, Blackstone Development LLC, just 6 weeks before the facility shut its doors. And one level deeper, buried in legal jargon, he found it. Blackstone was a subsidiary of Carter Holdings, his father's company. Ethan froze. He hadn't spoken to Charles Carter in nearly a decade, not since the explosive argument about his mother's death and the cold way the elder Carter had dismissed Eleanor's years of quiet service and sacrifice. His father had ruled the family legacy with an iron will and colder heart. But this buying an orphanage and then shutting it down. What had he done? Back in his car, Ethan called David. We need to talk. There's more here than we realized. When he arrived at the Bennett apartment, David already had a manila envelope on the table. Sophie found this in one of Grace's old journals. He said it was tucked behind a photo. Look at the date. The journal entry was dated 2 weeks before Grace's death. In tight, slanted script, she had written, I can't run forever. The things I heard, the files I saw, they were meant to be erased, but one child slipped through. They told me Lily was gone, but she wasn't. I held her. I took her, changed her name. They'd never let her live, if they knew. That's why I never told Sophie. If anything happens to me, David protect her. Ethan read the words aloud, the weight of them hitting harder with each syllable. Sophie stood silently beside them, her eyes huge and wet. She was scared. She whispered, My mom. She was scared for me. She was brave, Ethan corrected, looking at her gently. She saved you. David ran a hand through his hair. This is more than a lost adoption file. We're talking about people who had the power to erase a child's identity. Ethan nodded grimly, and I think my father had something to do with it. That night, Ethan returned to his condo in the city and unlocked a small safe behind an abstract painting in his office. Inside was a wooden box, unremarkable to most, but sacred to him. Inside, it lay a photograph of his mother holding a little girl with chestnut curls and bright eyes. Lily, next to the photo, was a letter unopened. Until now, Eleanor's last words to him sealed and dated just weeks before her death. My dearest Ethan, it began. If you are reading this, then you followed the whispers I could never say aloud. There are things I did to protect a child who was never mine, but became mine in the only way that mattered. If you find her, please tell her she was loved, that she had a family, even when the world tried to hide her. Ethan's hands trembled as he finished reading. He closed the box with a reverence reserved for the sacred and the broken. Outside, the city lights shimmered. Somewhere the truth waited, not just about Lily, but about the powerful hands that had tried to silence her existence. Ethan would find them, and this time he wouldn't let go. The wind whipped along the sidewalk outside the downtown law firm as Ethan Carter stepped out, clutching a thick folder under one arm. It was well past dark, but his mind refused to rest. Every document he unearthed only deepened the truth and sharpened the danger. In his hands were adoption records, financial transactions, and black and white scans of medical directives signed with the initials CC, his father's. But the most damning piece hadn't come from a file cabinet or digital server. It had come from the photo hidden beneath the velvet lining of his mother's old jewelry box. A baby girl wrapped in a hospital-issued blanket, her wristband bearing a name, long buried, Lily Bennett Carter. Ethan didn't know how to tell Sophie not yet, but he knew who he needed to see. He drove to a quiet street in the Upper East Side, where the Bennett family's old friend and former caseworker, Helen Monroe, now lived. She answered her door with tired eyes and a mug of tea in hand. But the moment Ethan mentioned Grace's name, she ushered him inside. "I was there when she adopted Sophie," Helen said, her voice brittle with memory. Grace was afraid even then, but determined. She never once hesitated about taking that baby home. Ethan opened the folder, placing a photo and a document on the coffee table. "Do you recognize this?" Helen's hand covered her mouth. "That's Lily. That's the original name, before the records were sealed and the paperwork changed." "Why, Ethan?" asked, his voice steady but tense. "Why would anyone erase a child's identity like this?" Helen hesitated. "Because that child wasn't supposed to survive." The words hung in the air like smoke. "I don't understand." Ethan said, "She was part of a program." Helen said, "I didn't know all the details. God help me. I didn't want to. But there were rumors. A private adoption ring disguised under charitable orphanage funding. They were selecting children based on bloodlines, traits, influential connections." Ethan stared at her. "And my father?" Helen nodded slowly. "Your father was one of the men who funded it. The Carter Foundation provided resources to these homes, but the children weren't always placed through legal means. Some were moved, hidden, rebranded." And Grace, Ethan asked, "She worked at one of these places?" "She did." Helen said, "She uncovered something she wasn't supposed to. One of the girls slated to be transferred disappeared. Next thing we knew, Grace had resigned, left the city, and resurfaced with an adoption certificate that no one dared question." Ethan felt like the floor had fallen away. Everything he knew about his father, about the empire he'd been expected to inherit, was being torn apart. He left Helen's apartment with a heavy heart and heavier evidence, but his next stop wouldn't wait. Sophie opened the door. Before he knocked, her expression a mix of apprehension and quiet determination. "I know you found something," she said. "Come in." They sat in silence at her kitchen table as Ethan laid out the contents of the folder. He explained everything: Grace's connection to the orphanage, the falsified adoption, his father's shadow over it all, and finally, the photo. Sophie stared at it for a long moment. "That's me," she whispered. "But my name?" "Lily." Ethan nodded. "You were taken to protect you. Grace saved you." Tears welled in Sophie's eyes, but she didn't cry. Instead, she straightened her voice, quiet but resolute. "Then I want the truth. All of it. If someone erased my name, I want to know why, and I want them to pay for it." Ethan smiled, faintly moved by her strength. "Then we're in this together." He pulled out a flash drive. "There's one last place we haven't looked. My father's personal office. It has a vault, a locked file drawer that even I couldn't access without a secondary code. But I have it now. What do you think is in there?" Sophie asked. "Whatever he was trying to keep from both of us," Ethan replied. "Records, medical files, and maybe proof that you were never meant to disappear." They didn't speak again for a moment, but something shifted between them. The boundaries between strangers and something closer. Maybe not yet family, but connected by blood, by pain and by the need for answers. The truth was no longer a ghost. It was real, pulsing beneath the surface, just waiting to be pulled into the light. And together, they were ready to face it. The air was thick with tension as Ethan Carter parked across the street from the Carter and Bell corporate headquarters. The building loomed like a monument to ambition, its glass exterior reflecting the city skyline and the secrets buried deep within its vaults. Sophie sat in the passenger seat, clutching her backpack tightly. Inside were copies of the adoption documents, the photos, and Grace's handwritten letters. Everything that could burn down an empire. We're not just looking for names or numbers anymore, Ethan said, his gaze fixed on the top floor. What we're after is proof. Proof that can't be denied. Proof that will stand up in a courtroom, in a boardroom, and in the court of public opinion. Sophie didn't speak, but she nodded. Her jaw was set, her eyes steady. She wasn't just curious anymore. She was angry, and she had every right to be. The building's security system recognized Ethan's executive clearance, and the guard at the desk greeted him with a polite nod. Evening, Mr. Carter. He returned the greeting with a tight smile and led Sophie through a side elevator rarely used. There's a service corridor near my father's office, he explained. It connects to the archive room and the private vault. I've only seen him access it once. They moved quickly through the silent hallways until they reached the reinforced door of Charles Carter's private archive. Ethan pulled a key card from his wallet, hesitated, then entered a code on the secondary keypad. A soft click echoed through the corridor. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and polished wood. Metal drawers stretched from floor to ceiling, each labeled with discreet tags. But it was the locked cabinet in the corner that Ethan moved toward it. This is it, he whispered, kneeling. The combination took 2 tries. When it opened, the files inside were organized with military precision. Contracts, medical records, financial transfers. And in the back, a red folder marked Project Aegis. Ethan opened it with trembling fingers. Inside were detailed records of dozens of children. Names, photos, genetic profiles. Sophie's was there, under her birth name, Lily Grace Bennett. The notes beside her name were chilling. Subject, removed from protocol at 6 months. Discreet relocation, arranged. Monitored status dormant. Sophie leaned over his shoulder. What does that mean? Protocol. Was I part of some experiment? Ethan shook his head, slowly, scanning the other documents. Not an experiment. A contingency plan. The files outlined a strategic initiative. Children of specific lineage placed into controlled environments, monitored for behavior intelligence, emotional development. If one candidate failed, another would replace them. It wasn't science. It was succession planning masked as research. The children weren't children to Charles Carter. They were assets. What kind of man does this? Sophie asked, voice tight with disbelief. Ethan didn't answer. He pulled out one last envelope tucked behind the folders. Inside was a single letter dated 15 years earlier. It was from Grace. To Charles Carter it began. If you're reading this, then you already know what I've done. I couldn't allow Lily to be used as leverage in your grotesque legacy. She is not a chess piece. She is a child, a person. And no matter what it costs me, I will raise her in truth and freedom. If you come after her, know that I have the means to expose everything, and I will. Grace. Sophie blinked hard, wiping at her eyes. She knew. She knew the whole time. Ethan looked at her. She risked everything for you, for your safety, and now we know why. The sound of footsteps in the hallway broke their moment. Someone's coming, Sophie whispered. Ethan quickly photographed the files, tucked the original letter into his coat, and shut the vault. They exited through the side corridor, hearts pounding. As they reached the elevator, a voice called out behind them, "Mr. Carter." It was Philip, the night manager, older, kind, and trusted. "Long night?" he asked, eyes darting between Ethan and Sophie. Ethan smiled tightly. "Just tying up some loose ends." Philip nodded but hesitated. Then he leaned in slightly. "Your father has people watching the guest list for the foundation gala. You're on it. So is someone named Bennett." Ethan stiffened. "Thank you, Philip." The elevator doors closed. Silence returned. Sophie turned to him. "They're planning something, aren't they?" "Yes," Ethan said. "But now so are we." Outside, the city pulsed with light and noise. But inside that elevator, two people stood quietly, no longer running, ready to fight, ready to reveal what others had buried. The truth was theirs now. And no one, not even Charles Carter, could bury it again. Under the soft glow of the kitchen lights, Ethan sat at the small wooden table in Rachel's apartment. The files they'd pulled from the vault spread out before them, like pieces of a shattered truth. Sophie sat across from him. Her arms folded, her expression unreadable. In the silence that had settled between them, only the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional honk from the street below reminded them that life outside still moved on, indifferent to the secrets that had just been unearthed. Rachel entered the room, a tray of tea and toast in her hands. She set it down quietly, her eyes moving from Ethan's face to the papers. She hadn't said much since they returned, but the worry etched into her features betrayed the storm inside her. She reached for the envelope marked Project Aegis, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened it again. "I didn't want to believe it," she said softly. "I thought your father's reach stopped at money and influence. But these are children." Sophie's voice came out flat, detached, the way someone speaks when the weight of betrayal has yet to fully settle. "I wasn't adopted. I was chosen." Rachel looked up, but Sophie didn't meet her eyes. Instead, she stared down at her own name, printed in clinical ink on the documents, like she had been an experiment rather than a daughter. Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on the table. "You weren't chosen because of your worth. You were stolen because of your potential. But Grace didn't let them win. She took you out of their world. She raised you to be her daughter, not Charles Carter's next pawn. That broke the dam." Sophie stood abruptly, pushing her chair back with a sharp screech. She walked to the window, folding her arms tightly across her chest. "Then why does it still feel like he owns a piece of me?" Rachel moved to her side, her hand resting gently on Sophie's shoulder. "Because that's how people like him work. They don't just take your name or your past. They make you question your future." Outside, the first snow had started to fall, soft flakes drifting lazily under the street lamps, coating the world in temporary silence. It was the kind of snow that blanketed chaos, that whispered of new beginnings, even as it covered old scars. Ethan's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number flashed across the screen. It was a photo, grainy, taken at night, but unmistakable. Rachel's apartment building circled in red. Underneath it, just two words: "Back off." He turned the phone to show them. Sophie's face went pale. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. He knows. Ethan's voice was steady, but there was a fire behind it. We knew this would happen. He was never going to let us walk away with the truth. Sophie turned from the window. So, what do we do now? We fight back, Ethan said, but not with shadows and whispers. At the gala, in front of the cameras, with every person he's ever fooled watching. Rachel moved back to the table, rifling through the documents, until she found the one she had hidden in her own files years ago. A birth certificate. Sophie's real one, and next to it, a photo of Grace with a younger version of Charles Carter, before the empire, before the lies. There's more than just your file, Rachel said. There are others. Children placed in homes through his network, monitored through private schools, scholarships, adoption agencies. What he did to you, he's done to others. Sophie's jaw clenched. Then we make it stop for all of them. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, marking the passage of a moment that had changed everything. They weren't just surviving. Now, they were planning. Ethan looked across the table. We'll need allies. People who've worked with him. People who regret it. Rachel nodded. I can reach out to Marissa Wynn. She was on the board when the foundation first launched. She left after a year, said she didn't like where things were headed. Ethan opened a new message thread, sending a copy of the redacted documents to an anonymous journalist contact he trusted. And I'll send this to the Herald. Let them do what they do best. Ask questions. The night stretched on quiet, but charged. Outside, the snow fell faster, but inside that little apartment, a revolution was quietly being born. One forged not with revenge, but with truth, and the kind of courage that only grows in the hearts of those who've been broken and still choose to stand. The storm was coming. But this time, they wouldn't face it alone. The grand ballroom of the New York Civic Center shimmered with opulence. A towering glass sculpture spun slowly above the crowd, casting fractured light onto a sea of dark suits and glittering gowns. The gala had been orchestrated as Charles Carter's crowning achievement, a celebration of his legacy under the guise of philanthropy. Every city official, investor, and press contact was in attendance. It was the perfect illusion of power and the perfect place for it all to fall apart. Backstage, Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, but his fingers trembled slightly. His reflection in the mirror showed not just a polished man in a tailored tuxedo, but someone standing on the edge of a moment that would redefine his life. Rachel stood beside him, calm and composed, holding a folder tightly in her hands. Documents that carried the weight of decades of deception. Sophie sat nearby, her dress simple yet elegant. Her hair pulled back the ruby necklace she wore, once belonging to her mother, now resting against her collarbone like a shield. She clutched a small flash drive in her hand, the contents of which could shatter an empire. You know, your cue, Ethan asked her, his voice low. Sophie nodded, eyes focused. Right after your speech, the three of them had gone over the plan so many times it had become second nature. But it wasn't just a plan. It was a reckoning. Across the ballroom, Charles Carter worked the crowd, shaking hands and posing for photos. His silver hair gleamed under the chandelier's glow. His smile was the same one he'd used for years to close deals and silence doubt. But tonight, that smile would falter. The MC stepped to the podium, voice amplified over the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us to honor the remarkable contributions of Charles Carter and the Carter Foundation. But before our honored guest takes the stage, please welcome his son, Ethan Carter. Applause echoed through the room as Ethan stepped into the spotlight. He looked calm, confident, but his heart beat like a drum inside his chest. He reached the podium and took a breath. "Thank you all for being here," he began scanning the room. "Tonight, we're supposed to celebrate legacy, achievement, philanthropy. But legacies aren't just about what we build. They're about how we build them and who pays the price." There was a shift in the atmosphere, subtle. A few heads turned. For most of my life, I believed in the story my father told about where we came from, how we rose. I believed in him until I found out the truth. Charles, standing at the edge of the room, stiffened. Ethan continued. 15 years ago, a program called Project Aegis was quietly embedded into the Carter Foundation. Under the guise of community upliftment, children were taken from orphanages, selectively adopted based on genetic profiles, and monitored for behavior and performance. They were raised as investments, not people. Gasps broke out. Murmurs rippled across the ballroom like shock waves. Ethan glanced to the side of the stage. Sophie emerged, walking slowly but steadily into the light. She stood beside him and lifted the flash drive. "This contains the records," she said, files, showing how Charles Carter orchestrated the placements, manipulated records, and destroyed the identities of children, including mine. I was one of them. I was taken. My mother, Grace. Carter saved me. And he tried to erase both of us. The projection screens behind them flickered to life. Rachel's voice, pre-recorded, filled the room. "My name is Rachel Davis. I worked with Charles Carter at the foundation. I stayed silent too long, but no more." Emails, adoption lists, financial documents appeared on screen, undeniable and damning. Security moved toward the stage, but were intercepted by members of the city's legal counsel, already briefed and positioned. A lawyer stepped forward and addressed the room. "As of this morning, a formal investigation has been launched into the Carter Foundation. Subpoenas have been issued. Mr. Carter, you are not permitted to leave the premises until questioning is complete." Charles's expression twisted. He turned to leave, but found himself face to face with Olivia Wells, once one of his closest allies. She stood tall, holding her badge. "Charles Carter, you're under federal investigation. Step aside." The cameras flashed. The crowd was stunned into silence, and then slowly applause began. Quiet at first from the corners of the room, then louder building until the entire ballroom erupted. Sophie stepped back from the podium, her eyes shining, her shoulders no longer heavy with unspoken truths. Ethan reached for her hand. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not as a symbol or a secret, but as herself. The truth was out. The empire had fallen, and from its ashes, something real was beginning. If this story moved you, if it made you believe that justice and love can rise even from the deepest betrayal, subscribe to the channel and don't miss the next chapters. What are your thoughts? Drop a comment and join the conversation. Because stories like this are just the beginning. In the powerful story of Sophie Bennett and Ethan Carter, we witnessed a journey that began with a mysterious ring and unfolded into a battle for truth, identity, and justice. Sophie, a girl unknowingly entangled in a web of secrets, uncovered her past through an unexpected encounter with Ethan, the son of the very man who had orchestrated a system of manipulation and control. As Ethan faced the truth about his father, Charles Carter, he chose not silence or loyalty to legacy, but courage and integrity. Together, Sophie and Ethan dismantled an empire built on lies, exposing a decades-long scheme that targeted vulnerable children. What began as a chance meeting on a country road evolved into the reclaiming of lives, the healing of broken bonds, and the building of a new future rooted in transparency and compassion. The deepest lesson this story offers is that legacy isn't what we inherit. It's what we choose to become, no matter where we come from or how painful our past may be. We always have the power to seek the truth, to fight for what's right, and to write a better ending for ourselves and those we love. In a world where appearances can deceive, Sophie and Ethan remind us that authenticity, resilience, and empathy are far more powerful than wealth or status. What did this story mean to you? Did it remind you of someone you know or inspire you to think differently about your own life? Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartfelt, emotional stories that touch the soul and remind us all of the power of truth and love.